Step into the book space on TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube, and you will likely see a whole host of millennials and Gen Z showcasing their book hauls with the phrase, "Buying books is my therapy."
Affirmation of the day. If you stop buying books, you can afford therapy. I'll see you at the bookshop.
So my husband said I needed therapy, and I told him I'm going to start going every Saturday for an hour and that it's $150 an hour. He said he'd pay for it, but so here I am.
Look, I know. Saying buying books is therapy is obviously a joke. The majority of people saying this on social media don't actually think buying books is a replacement for actual therapy, for the most part. However, I do want to explore this in a little more detail and answer the question, does buying books count as therapy? And is it harmful for us to use the phrase in the first place? You may have heard the phrase buying books and reading books are two different hobbies, and I think that's the perfect starting point for this section of the video, because I'm coming to realize that this is very true. For me personally, there is nothing that stresses me out more than buying a book and having it sit on my shelf for way too long unread. I want to read that book, and if I'm not getting to it, it stresses me out. Hence, currently doing a book buying ban. So when I buy a book, I have the intention to read it as soon as possible, even if that means I unintentionally don't get to it for a while. I now know there are many people who, yes, love to read, but also love to shop. Buying books is a fun experience. You get a little tickle in your brain when you pick out that book that looks good, part with your money, and then take it home. But I don't know about you, when I get home and put that book on my shelf, that tickle kind of goes away. It's like once that book is on my shelf, it's no longer special or shiny and new, it just is. Well, there's a reason for that, because that tickle in your brain, that feel-good feeling, is dopamine. Dopamine is known as the feel-good hormone and is part of your internal reward system. This system is designed from an evolutionary standpoint to reward you when you're doing the things you need to do to survive, like eat, drink, and compete to survive. Our brains are hardwired to seek out behaviors that release dopamine. When you do something pleasurable, your brain releases a large amount of it, which makes you feel good, and so you seek more of that feeling. And one of the things that gives us a nice shot of dopamine? Shopping. According to the Cleveland Clinic, while retail therapy is a term that's mostly used as a joke, it's actually partly accurate. When not done to extreme levels as an addiction or as a compulsive behavior, retail therapy can reinforce a sense of personal control over our environment, get us to visualize positive outcomes, distract us from the stresses of daily life, as long as it doesn't turn into avoidance, encourages physical activity if we're going to a physical store, and brings people together if you're meeting up with a friend. And the most interesting part, this dopamine or feel-good feeling starts before you get to the bookstore. It begins when you start visualizing the idea of going to the bookstore. So in most cases, you don't even have to go to feel good. But like all forms of dopamine, that good feeling doesn't last as long as we'd like. I mentioned earlier that as soon as I get home and add the new book to my shelf, that good feeling goes away. That's because what comes up must come down, and dopamine is no different. You get the hit when you start thinking about going to the bookstore, but once you're home and you put your new books on the shelf, that dopamine goes away. At this point, you either shrug it off and don't really think about it, or you just might dip back into retail therapy again. Maybe not right away, but soon. You know you do it. In contrast, when you're reading the book you've bought, that is where the long-term satisfaction and, yes, therapy comes in. Bibliotherapy is a type of therapy. It involves reading books and other forms of literature alongside other forms of therapy to support mental health. The types of books used in bibliotherapy can range from philosophy to memoirs and self-help, but typically the type of books that are recommended are fiction. Mostly because in fiction compared to non-fiction, which is mostly advice-based, the following transformation can happen when you're reading a book. Identification. The reader affiliates with the character in the text and identifies with their problems and goals. Catharsis. The reader experiences the character's emotions, struggles, and hopes from a safe and removed position. Insight. The reader recognizes similarities between the characters or the situations in the text and the reader's own circumstances and the decision to apply ideas from the text to the reader's life. Universalization. The reader realizes they are not alone. Others have experienced similar challenges and find ways to navigate them. I'll give you a really solid and personal example. Last year, I read A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. It's a story about a world in which robots who were once used for labor gained self-awareness and decided to, en masse, put down their tools and roam into the wilderness, never to be seen again. The book follows a tea monk who encounters one of these robots by accident. It's a very philosophical and reflective book. The stages I went through while reading this book were as follows. I identified with the main character, enjoying the simplicity of life but feeling like something was missing. I then experienced the character's emotions, struggles, and hopes from a safe and removed position. I recognized similarities between the main character in the text and me, and came to some personal conclusions because of this. I then realized I'm not alone. The main character experienced similar challenges and found ways to navigate them. The result of this was a pretty emotional read and one that sits firmly as one of my favorite books, that I'll be rereading whenever I need a boost. It felt like therapy. I even put those words into my review. So what exactly is bibliotherapy and who is it for? According to Psychology Today, bibliotherapy can be applied to patients suffering from anxiety, depression, or other mood disorders, those struggling with trauma or addiction, or those going through grief, a divorce, or other relationship challenges. Bibliotherapy can be practiced in either individual or group therapy sessions or without the guidance of a therapist at all. In an article with The New Yorker, Cara Dwin Dovey was gifted a remote session with a bibliotherapist. In that article, she goes through the session and describes what it was like. It was a really interesting read if you want to check it out. Essentially, if you pick a bibliotherapist as your therapist of choice, you'll sit in a therapy session like you would normally, but at the end of that session, they will suggest a book or a few books that will aid you in working through whatever it is that you want to work through. In the article, she mentions that the therapist went into a lot of detail and asked a lot of questions to make sure the books they prescribed were right. Basically, alongside talking through what you are going through, you get some solid book recommendations as homework, which sounds good to me. Although in an article with the BBC, Andrew Schumann, an NHS physician, says, while fiction bibliotherapy isn't a substitute for other treatments, in conjunction with other therapies, it can be a massively powerful boosting therapy. Essentially, bibliotherapy is a good tool, but it's not the only tool you should use. Of course, we can't say that just reading in your own time counts technically as bibliotherapy. The idea is that you pick books that will actively help you reflect and process something you're working on in that moment. This can happen by accident like it did with me and A Psalm for the Wild Built, but it's meant to be intentional. Having said all this, while there's plenty of research and studies to back up reading as a therapeutic resource, there isn't quite enough for scientists to be 100% convinced. After all, the therapy you gain from reading a book that helps you process something is kind of hard to quantify. It's pretty subjective, and you could read a book that's designed to help you process something, but actually ends up doing the opposite. So it's complicated. Regardless, though, we know there are generally therapeutic benefits to reading regardless of what it is you're reading. You know, within reason. As in, just the act of reading itself has benefits for your mind. Researchers believe that mentally transporting ourselves away from our physical surroundings can provide an escape or opportunity for meaningful contemplation. Reading helps reduce stress and anxiety and takes the mind away from other things happening in your environment. Research shows that regular reading can lower blood pressure, reduce stress, and improve sleep quality. I could keep going, but you get the point. So let's get back to the crux of the matter because, like I said, the people who make this kind of content or say that buying books is therapy in a kind of offhand comment way don't really mean what they're saying, you know? It's kind of a joke. But when it becomes such a well-used phrase because you use it so often, you start to believe it. This kind of phrasing might not be something you actually want to be doing or that's within your financial wheelhouse right now. Just like actual therapy, which while is an incredibly useful tool, can be expensive. Books, if you're buying lots of them all the time and brand new, can add up too. There are times when I've spent an equal amount of money on books that I pay for in therapy for 1 month. Books, especially if you live in countries where they're not cheap or easily accessible, can cost quite a lot. Reading, however, now that's something we can call a form of therapy. As we've seen, reading can be a huge benefit to improving mental health. One that has long-term and lasting benefits rather than a quick fix, which book buying can be. Guys, I'm going to be honest with you. When I first started writing the script for this video, I was of the opinion that all book shopping was a release of some puny dopamine response, and the real therapy came when you actually read the book. And while that theory still holds up, after doing all the research for this video, it's not quite as cut and dry as that. If you're going through something, going to the store and buying some books does have some value. As long as you don't take it to the extreme, of course. It can give you some relief, it can make you feel connected, and it can give you some control you might not feel over your life at the time. Essentially, it can bring you some relief when you might need it most. I don't think that's something we should dismiss. It can be something really positive in our lives. Do I think it's a shame it doesn't last very long? Yes. Do I also think it can be used to overconsume? Yes, absolutely. The solid and long-lasting therapeutic results come from reading the right books at the right time, or just reading in general. Of course, if you can, alongside traditional therapy. So while for me personally, constantly buying books is not something I enjoy or feel good doing, I can see how once I'm off my ban, I will find some solid enjoyment doing it, especially if it's done in a physical bookstore with a friend. But you tell me, do you consider buying books to be therapy? Let me know in the comments and let's chat. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time for another video.